Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am honored, and we are all honored to have Pratima on the phone with us today, talking about her book, Nevertheless, She Persisted. A great read. It would hit my highlight read of my summer in 2018, so thank you very much for keeping me company at the beach, Pratima. Today we have a Q&A session about you, your view of women and leadership roles and just women in business in general, and of course about your book. A little bit on the Women in Management course at Ottawa University. I am Professor Parker. I teach this course, and as we all know, millions upon millions of women contribute to the workforce. No longer are women just stay-at-home moms. We're doctors, engineers, educators. We serve in our military and armed forces, and just about anything that we want to be. In terms of an economic force, women are consumers, buyers of products, and often decision makers within a household. Companies are recognizing now the return on diversity, that having women in top leadership positions, represented in board seats, what that means to better and best serve consumers and lead leaders in leadership roles. The course, Women in Management at Ottawa University, recognizes and understands that there is truly a concept of a glass ceiling, and we truly analyze that complex maze or labyrinth that exists and teach women how to overcome obstacles of discrimination, prejudice, conscious and unconscious bias that exists within the workplace. Pratima, I'm so excited that you joined this call with me and have agreed to do this Q&A session. One of the things that we just talked about this last week in class is an elevator speech, and how important it is for a woman or anyone to be able to sell their sizzle. And so maybe just to start, I'd love to turn it over to you and hear a little bit about you, listen to your sizzle, and maybe tell us about what inspired you to write your book.
Thanks, Krystal. It's amazing to be talking to you. As you know, you've been my mentor through this whole book writing process, and I appreciate all the help you've given me. You also turned me on to the labyrinth. I mean, that was kind of, my book was based off of that, the research that I did through that book. So thank you so much.
Awesome.
My elevator speech or my elevator pitch. I mean, this is like the hard one, but the way I just go off the elevator pitch is basically introduce myself. So I'm like, hi, I'm Pratima Gluckman. I'm an engineering leader. I work at VMware and I run engineering for blockchain. And recently I wrote this book that got published in May of 2018. It's a book on women and leaders. And it was a personal self journey for myself as I went through interviewing 25 women leaders in tech. And the story and the book is pretty much all their personal, deep personal stories that help you navigate this labyrinth in tech.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know how long that was, but
no, it's great. That's exactly right, because the next thing that comes to mind is a question, and that typically is one of the great signs of an excellent sell your sizzle or elevator speech, is getting the person that you're speaking to want to know more about you. So let's just kick it off, because I think you led me into my very first question, and that is, has your experience in your company changed at all since writing this book?
It's, VMware has been very good about diversity and inclusion for a very, very long time, even before I started to write this book. And I think it started with just having a female founder, which was Diane Green. And that was a blessing in disguise in some sense, because when you have a woman at the top, there is some level of this unconscious bias or this gender bias doesn't quite play in the picture, because it really helps to have a female leader at the top, because the culture just percolates downward. And, this recent law that Governor Brown passed, which is having women part of boards, is actually a good move, because it really helps to have women part of these boards that can percolate some of that downwards. And you need that. You need grassroots levels, which is pretty much what I'm at. I'm at the grassroots trying to fight for diversity and inclusion. but it always helps to have someone from the top do the same thing so we can meet midway. And so VMware's had that advantage, having Diane Green as the CEO of the company. And it takes around 10 years for the culture to change. And it's been it's probably been a little over 10 years since she's left as the CEO. But having the new CEO, Pat Gelsinger, he's very big on diversity and inclusion. And so diversity and inclusion has been a big part of VMware. But it was something that I wasn't participating in, only because I never thought my gender was causing any problems. I wasn't aware of it. It was only in 2016 that when I hit my first glass ceiling and I noticed an old boys network, it was then that I decided to go off and write this book. Since then, VMware has done some really cool things in terms of investing in the Stanford Leadership Lab. They invested $15 million. They worked with this a new initiative called Seeds of Change at Stanford, where they follow middle and high school kids and kind of see what are the barriers towards them staying in STEM education. So they've done a lot of that. They're working with a lot of researchers on this. So they've done a lot in terms of diversity and inclusion. And at the grassroots level too, there are a lot of women who are passionate about diversity and inclusion, and so are a lot of the men. And once my book got published, VMware did have me speak at 2 different occasions. One in the Palo Alto office, I did a panel with some of the women in the book. And then I did another talk in Seattle, in the Seattle office. And yeah, so it's, I think right now there is an awareness and a lot of people are willing to listen. And since my book's been published, I've had so many opportunities to speak at various companies. I spoke at PayPal, Realtor.com, Uber. I spoke at Plantronics. I spoke at many companies, and I'm not done. I'm speaking at a couple more companies next week. Talking about the book, talking about the issues in the book and how we can create change as we move forward.
Well, that's great. I'm excited about what you have coming up. Some great companies on the resume for sure. And I'm so glad you brought up the point on the law in California being changed, requiring a minimum of 1 woman on a board by the end of 2019. I think that's excellent. Specifically, what I do in working with boards, it is typically a lot of male dominance on those boards, and a lot of times the return for being able to capture your audience or sell your product or whatever it is, having a woman present certainly brings that return on diversity. So excellent point there. Well, I'm glad that you talked about working with other companies. What have you seen a universal sort of challenge that women are facing in organization? I know that your book was focused on women in tech initially, but certainly you've been able to branch out universally to different companies because ultimately business is business. Is there something that comes up over and over again, maybe a specific challenge that you're hearing when you're working in these different companies?
Yeah, I think the specific challenge that I'm seeing is on both sides with women and with men. With women, it's perhaps confidence. There's a lot of, I think it's just that and I don't want to generalize here, but most of us, and myself too, we struggle with imposter syndrome. And that really gets in the way of us achieving what we want to achieve. And when you look at from the angle of the men, it's a lot of unconscious bias. It's not that they are doing this intentionally, but it's more unconscious. But I think a lot of awareness is happening now, which is helping a lot of that. It's helping men realize, okay, there's an unconscious bias and we have to work towards recognizing that bias. And so I think there are men who are genuinely making that effort. But also at the same time, diversity and inclusion could also, I'm afraid that it's becoming a checkbox with companies because there's so much pressure. like even with boards, and I want to go back to that, like having one woman on the board. I think now it's like a checkbox. Oh, we need one woman on the board. Let's get any woman on the board. And that's not the point. The point is, let's get qualified women on the board. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion also, we're talking about qualified women. We're not saying just because you're a woman, you get a seat at the table. That's not what we're advocating for. But that is kind of getting lost. That message is getting lost. And so you'll find on my Twitter account too, there are men who make these comments of like, oh, this is not diversity and inclusion because you're asking, we should just hire someone because that person's a woman. And we're saying, no, we want qualified women at the table. There are lots and lots and lots of qualified women out there. But what's happening is the unconscious bias is causing us to not recognize them, not recognize their potential. And that's what we're trying to advocate for. And so that's the challenge. I'm finding the challenge is a lot of education. There's a lot of, on the side, like when it comes to men, like there's a lot of education, and organizations too. There's a lot of education there. So they take this seriously, and it's not just a checkbox for them. And I think for women, it's more for us to recognize a lot of what we, just the confidence issues. And, the confidence issues, either they stem from childhood or they, over the years, just going through this unconscious bias. And when you're running into all of these things, your confidence just chips away. And so that, again, becomes a problem. So recognizing that and basically saying, I don't have to match 100% of this job requirement. If I am 60%, let me go apply. Having that confidence to take that risk and that leap of faith in yourself, I think is also very critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. That's absolutely, we spend an entire week talking about confidence and assertiveness and just the ability to overcome some of that confidence deficit that happens. Oftentimes women just get their education. I once had a mentor tell me that she didn't feel confident until she got her master's, and she paid basically $40,000+ for her confidence. She didn't believe it made her any smarter, but she just thought that having that degree positioned her in a better negotiating position with some of the male counterparts that she had, and it gave her confidence. And so you talked a little bit in that response about imposter syndrome. I know that you talked about that in your book. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. Imposter syndrome is just this feeling of being a fraud and that someone will find you out. This feeling of not knowing enough, not knowing enough on a particular subject, and that someone's going to find you out and, you're a fraud. And so there's this constant feeling that people have, and then men have it too. Men and women have it too. And so you'll see a lot of stories in the book about imposter syndrome. If you read the first chapter, which is Telly Whitney, I had this amazing experience with her because she co-founded the Grace Hopper Celebration. She's a computer scientist. And just sitting across her when I asked her, do you have imposter syndrome? She said, yes, I have it every day. And she said, I have this feeling that I'm not good enough. And that gave me chills because I wasn't expecting that. I somehow was very naive when I went through this process. And I thought these women didn't have imposter syndrome. I thought these women were breaking the glass ceiling. And I walked away with this information that no, that's not the case. They all have imposter syndrome. And I asked Telly, I said, how do you overcome this? And she said, I show up every day. And this was very useful for me just during the whole book writing process, because I never imagined I would write a book. This was never on my bucket list of things to do. Apparently a lot of people want to write books. I never knew that. This was never something, even when I picked up a book, I never fantasized or imagined I would write a book. And when I was going through that process, I felt like an imposter because I never considered myself a writer. I'm a geek. I love technology. I can write code. I can build teams. I can build, ship technical products. But writing was never something that I thought I was good at, or was something that, I would eventually do. And I had a lot of imposter syndrome through that process. And I think it was Telly's way of handling imposter syndrome that really helps me, is like showing up. So I would show up every day and, write more. And, it was tough. And you and I were in touch during that whole writing process too. And, how I struggled through that whole process. And so that was one part of the imposter syndrome. But Sarah Clatterbuck, she talks about how she handles imposter syndrome. She's got imposter syndrome. She says men have imposter syndrome, true. But she says that imposter syndrome is actually good for you. And it's good for you because it takes you out of your comfort zone. And you get to this level of discomfort, and you have to learn as much as you can to get comfortable. And then you get to this next level, and then you're uncomfortable again. And so this is actually helping you grow. So imposter syndrome is actually good for you. In some sense, the mentor you talked about, yes, she paid a big price, but she didn't feel like she was good enough to go off and do whatever she had to do. So she had to go get a $40,000 degree, which helped her get past that. And I'm sure she learned a lot through that process. And she got to the next level with that. And, sometimes we pay a high price, sometimes we don't, but it's actually good for you. So every time you're feeling like an imposter, it's embrace that feeling. Because, and I talk about it too, like greatness is around the corner because, for me personally, I had a lot of imposter syndrome and I kept at it and I kept going at every level. Now you can tell me, Pratima, are you going to write another book? And I'll be like, hell yeah, I'm going to write another book. But I've gone through that discomfort at this level.
That is wonderful to hear. I'm excited, and I know all of those that have read or are going to be reading your book, Nevertheless, She Persisted, are going to be so excited to hear that there's another book coming.
Yeah. It's that's on my bucket list of things to do.
Wonderful. Well, we're all waiting for that to be accomplished for sure. When you talk about, within having the imposter syndrome, confidence, and just the differences, between in having that unconscious or sometimes conscious bias that exists towards women, there are sometimes different communication styles and things that women can do to communicate in a way that may help overcome some of those stereotypes. I don't think it's any surprise for a woman that communicates with some assertiveness, confidence, that sometimes that can be considered pushy, or the word that comes up often is bitchy. And instead of and that stereotype exists for women that are confident and strong communicators. Is there anything from your experience or anything that you personally have done to overcome the communication barriers that can exist for women?
Yes, personally for myself, in my career, this was a hard one because I was raised to speak my mind. And I did that at home, at school. It got me into trouble, but I always fought for what I believed in, and I always spoke up. But I also realized that, especially in the professional environment, when I would speak up or I was assertive, people would call me aggressive. Mm-hmm. And I never understood what that meant. And I did a lot of research for the book and talking to all these women too, that I realized that they also were called aggressive. There were a few women in the book who were called aggressive, and I actually wrote a section on it. And it's not like these women are making other people feel bad or they're attacking people or anything. They're just being assertive. They're speaking up, and they're fighting for what they believe is the right thing to do. And so it becomes a double bind problem because, you have this thing where, women don't speak up and they have to lean in, and you have, Sheryl Sandberg's written this whole book. And then when women start doing it, then it also becomes a problem because then they're like, you're too aggressive. Pam Koska in the book, she was called the dragon lady. Lily Chang, she received the scariest award of the year from her company because she was, she would speak up her mind and she was assertive. And I think this is where men and society can help, because there is this unconscious bias, or even this explicit bias, which basically says women have to be a certain way. And also that leadership is a certain style. And that's not true. I mean, you can have leadership where, you don't have to be so assertive, you don't have to be so opinionated, whatever, but you can be effective, you can be collaborative, you can be a different type of leader that achieves the same goals. For instance, you have Jennifer Anderson in my book. If you meet her, she's an introvert. She actually had me at Uber, and she interviewed me at Uber. She's an introvert. She's very shy, but she's very effective too. She's effective. She collaborates well. She's very thoughtful of her people. She's extremely strong technically. She got a PhD from Stanford. She's got strong technical credibility, but she's an introvert. She's shy, but that doesn't mean she can't be a leader. And so there has to be this shift in the way we think about what leadership is and who can fit that mold. And also that women can be assertive, they can be ambitious, and then there's nothing wrong with that. And once we start making that mind shift, then this won't be a problem, because we'll embrace all types of leadership and we'll embrace all types of communication, and not have to penalize certain people for a certain type of communication.
That's incredible advice. And ultimately, it's about being yourself. I love to say, be you bravely, and truly just be who you were made to be, and lean into that. Speaking of Cheryl, I love her quote when she says, "I want every little girl who's told she's bossy to be told instead she has leadership skills." And I think a lot of that is conditioning from early ages. A little girl who's considered bossy, but yet a young boy who's displaying the same type of behavior, it gets to be a leader. And I think that being able to overcome some of those early conditioning that we fall into just because society would be helpful in preparing women of the future to lean in and become who they ultimately are, which is themselves. And no matter what that looks like, to your point. So speaking of that, women of the future, what advice do you have for women of the future?
This is a great question. I think about it myself a lot, because, I have a daughter who's 5, and I'm always wondering how to raise her. And there's this amazing quote by Reshma Saujani, who is the CEO of Girls Who Code. She said that we raise our boys to be brave and our girls to be perfect. And when we think about women of the future, I think that's something we should be really cognizant about, is raising our girls to be brave, and also raising ourselves to be brave. I think would help so much, because I think finally it goes back to that confidence, that belief in ourselves that always comes in our way. And I think it's more for women than it is for men. And I see that all the time. And I'll explain this. Even between just me and my husband, there are times when I'll be like, "Oh, what should I do about this?" And he's just extremely confident. He's like, "Oh, this is what you should do." And I'm like, "No, do you think I'm really worth that much?" And he's like, "Yeah, you're worth that much." And I think it's just how we view ourselves, and I think just building that confidence in ourselves, raising ourselves to be brave, raising our younger generation to be brave, raising our peers to be brave, raising our executives to be brave, our female executives. And this is for men and women to do, I think would really help, the leadership of the future, because, you'll have a lot of women taking risks, taking chances, going out there and trying to change the world. And I think that would be immensely helpful. And that will also switch the role of what a man should do versus what a woman should do, and will flip things on its head, which is just going to be great for our future generation.
Absolutely. I've got so many notes, and writing down the word brave is absolutely empowering. Such an empowering word. You talked about telling your husband, I don't know, am I worth that much? How can women overcome this pay gap that it's a real thing? It's true. It's not pie in the sky. It's not something made up. Statistically, women make less than men in doing the same exact job. How do we overcome this, and not so far out future reaching that your daughter and my daughter will still be underpaid? How can we make a big difference and make it quickly?
Yeah, and I think I can't remember if it was you that pointed me to that book, Women Don't Ask. I can't remember who it was. It was one of the women in the book, but this book, Women Don't Ask, talks about how we leave $500,000 in a career if we don't negotiate on our first job. That's huge. Your first job out of college, being able to negotiate your first job is so important. And that, I think, needs to start from from middle school and high school. I think that is something that should start early. When I started my career, I remember in fact, my brother-in-law was my best friend in college, and he and I went to the same school. We got the same degree, and I had this thing in my head that I wanted to graduate with A's in my master's. That was like, I didn't want to B. It was some weird thing that was in my head. I wanted only A's, and I worked really hard, and I did all the homework. And the guys and friends around me would pretty much take my homework, and they somehow scraped through through their masters. But when it came to our first job, I remember I was talking to my brother-in-law, who is doing extremely well. He's doing a lot better than I am today in tech. And he coasted through school. And I remember my first job when he and I were talking, and I said, hey, they're paying me, and this was like $55,000 in Texas, my first job. And he was getting paid more. And he said, that's ridiculous. You should ask for more. And I couldn't believe that he had so much confidence, that he knew that he deserved much more. And here I was, who aced through college and who worked so hard and, all that. And I was just struggling to ask for more money because I truly didn't think I deserved it. And I didn't realize it then. Like, when he was telling me, you need to ask for more money, I just didn't understand why. And I just thought he was greedy, he was whatever. And over the years, he's been my support. Like, any job I've switched, even when I started at VMware, he helped me negotiate and get into VMware with the decent base and decent stock options. And he helped me. And I think that was important. And I never realized how important that was until I started writing this book. And so I think a lot of education from early on, but I'm already seeing a lot of the younger generation being very savvy about this, much more savvy than my generation was. So things are getting better. I can see that people are asking for what they're worth. The men in their lives are are pushing the women to ask for more. And also just having, Tracy Chu from, I forget which company, Pinterest, I think, she talked about how she wanted all the salaries out there. She wanted an audit on the pay, and she really shined a light on this pay gap. And I think a lot of companies are noticing this. Mm-hmm. Like, VMware now is 99 cents to $1. So we've come a long way, and I think we've come a long way in tech. In tech, I think we're closing the gap. I'm appalled at the other industries where we're 70 cents to $1. Mm-hmm. And something really needs to change there. Maybe we need a law to pass to get equal pay. And I don't know. And I think we have the laws, but we just don't hold ourselves accountable to it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a problem. But going back, I think it's a lot of the confidence and knowing what you're worth, and that is going to be just work in progress. It's constant work in progress. And so shining that light on yourself is very helpful. And I try to intervene with a lot of the women who go get jobs. I always ask them, did you negotiate? Did you try to ask for more money? So I try to do that within my circle, so at least I can have some impact. And I think a lot of people should start doing that. men and women, because it impacts men too. If the woman's not negotiating and fighting for herself or advocating for herself, the men are losing too.
It's a great point. Excellent points. Two more questions, and then I'll give you an opportunity to kind of wrap up and plug your book and where people can buy it. One question that came to mind earlier when we were talking, and you do a great job of sort of leveling the playing field. It isn't about just women. It's about men and women, and it's about, having a level playing ground. But I'm sure you've heard this before, and I wonder how you address it. Do people call you a feminist? And are you?
Yes. Yes, this was a hard label for me because I didn't grow up thinking I was a feminist or wanting to be a feminist. It was never something that even crossed my mind, because I was raised, by parents who basically didn't distinguish between, a boy and a girl, like my brother or myself or my other sisters. My older sister played cricket for India, and a man's game. And I watched her play when I was growing up. I watched her play with the boys, and she won World Cups for the country, and she's made the country proud. And
wow,
it's almost like women's soccer. It wasn't highly recognized. Now it is. It's getting better in India. And I never grew up with that, with, men, women, it was only, I think, in 2016 when I started writing the book. I also worried about that. I worried about what people would think about me now that I was coming out and advocating for women, how my company would view me and how my team would view me. But eventually I decided that this was important to me. This was a battle I wanted to fight. And this is not about gender, really. It's pretty much about human rights in some sense. Think about it. I mean, the pay gap we talked about. I can't imagine why women have to be paid less than men. I don't get it for being as qualified, or, so it's just a human right. And if that means they want to label it as a feminist, then so be it. I'm a feminist, and I'm not ashamed to say that. And, I don't think about it too much. And if people don't want to talk to me because I'm a feminist, so be it. I mean, I view it as their loss rather than my loss.
It definitely aligns with be yourself and be confident. So it certainly aligns with the things we've been talking about. I know we're running out of time here. In about 60 seconds, can you share your best advice? Because this is something that comes up often in our class and with women in general, and in several mentoring sessions that I have done and coaching sessions that I've done. How can you help, or what advice do you have on life-work balance?
Choose the best partner. I think that's the best advice I can give, because what happens with women is once they, find a partner, things tend to change. Their career becomes less important. And so advocating for that, fighting for that, or just finding someone supportive who's going to support your career as much as they expect you to support their career.
Great advice. That's great advice. Well, just in a quick summary, I have written down so many notes, but the highlight is, and I love John Maxwell. He says, jump and build your wings on the way down. And we talk about confidence, and use the word bravery, being yourself, show up, ask for more, and know your worth. Pratima, you have just given me so many different thoughts and ideas to put on note cards around my office to continue to have positive affirmations. What would you say? Go ahead and wrap us up here, and then tell everyone where they can find your book, Nevertheless, She Persisted, and where they can find you and follow you.
Thank you. Thank you, Krystal. I'm so, really happy that you had me on your podcast. And so you can find my book on Amazon. That's the best place to get it. You can also get it on Friesen Press, which is my publisher. And a lot of information is on my website, www.pratimagluckman.com. I'm starting, blogs and podcasts, and all good stuff's on my website, and that's probably the best place to go, because then you can get to my social media, you can get to Amazon, you can get to Friesen Press from there.
Thanks, Pratima. You are a rock star. I'm ready for book number 2. But for those of you that have not picked up book number 1, Nevertheless, She Persisted, do yourself a favor, all the women in your life, grab that book, read it cover to cover, share it with other women, and get to know this beautiful, smart, intelligent, incredible, hardworking, brave, confident woman, Miss Pratima.
Thank you, Krystal.
Thank you.